Okay. There's still a few more people coming in the room, so I'll go slow with my introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming to Jagmeet Singh's press conference today. Bienvenue tout le monde et merci de venir au point de presse à Jagmeet Singh. We will start off with remarks from Mr. Singh, and then we will go to questions. A reminder to use the raise your hand function for your question. Nous allons commencer avec des remarques par Mr. Singh et ensuite nous allons prendre des questions. N'oubliez pas d'utiliser la fonction lever la main quand vous avez une question. Over to you, Jagmeet.
Thanks so much. Today, we're calling for an emergency debate in Parliament to respond to the convoy and to the escalating tensions that we're seeing. We need to see some leadership, and there hasn't been that leadership at the federal level, and so we're calling for that. There's 4 things that we want to see happen, and I'm hoping to be able to use the emergency debate as a platform to talk about these 4 things. First of all, we have a crisis on our hands, and we need to immediately have the Prime Minister, representing the federal level, the federal government, meet with the affected municipalities to offer any help that we can to solve this problem. And there's serious concerns going on. Obviously, in Ottawa, people are going through a really horrible situation where it's clear that the stated intent of this convoy is to overthrow the government. It's in their memorandum of understanding. It's clear they're not hiding away from it. And they are harassing citizens. They are threatening people, assaulting people. And recent examples of setting fire to a building because they're fed up with the noise is clear. This is a violent and dangerous action that is causing really severe consequences to people. We also know in the Coutts crossing, there are truckers that are stuck, Canadian truckers that cannot get across the border because of the convoy blocking truckers getting across the border, and these folks are in a really dire way. We know that other cities are experiencing this as well, Toronto and Quebec to lesser extents. But we first and foremost need to meet with the municipalities and sit down about what we can do to help solve this problem. Secondly, what's clear, and I alluded to this before, that the intent of this convoy is clear. They want to overthrow the government. And now there is clearly foreign interference. There are many examples of American politicians and other folks that are funding this direct action that is trying to undermine our democracy. It's directly attempting to undermine our democracy, replace elected officials with unelected committee made up of members of who knows how they're chosen. It is clear that this is not a protest. This is an act to try to overthrow the government, and it is getting funded by foreign interference, and we need to investigate and stop the flow of that foreign interference, particularly coming from the States. Thirdly, Canadians need a plan to get out of this pandemic. And up to this point, people were told, well, if you get vaccinated, we'll be able to get through this. Now, lots of people are vaccinated and they're still in the pandemic, and they want to know what's it going to take for us to get out of this. And people need to have that plan. What does that plan look like? So the federal government needs to meet with public health experts, get together and provide a plan. We know that some of the elements of this plan are going to include making sure we continue to get vaccinated and have access to vaccinations. We need to get testing, and we need to make sure that we're helping with the emergency crisis in our healthcare system because it continues to be pushed to the brink. And so these are some of the elements of the plan, but we need a plan. What is it going to look like for us to get out of this pandemic? How much more is it going to take, and what do we need to do? And people need to know that. That's something that's really important. And then fourth and finally, there are a lot of problems that Canadians faced before the pandemic that only got worse in the pandemic. And we need to come together as parliamentarians and work on solving those problems, providing solutions to those problems. There are people that cannot find housing. There are people that cannot put a roof over their head, nor can they don't have enough resources to pay the bills or buy groceries because the cost of living is going up. We need to get together and start looking for solutions to fix these problems so that people can find housing, people can pay their bills, people can afford groceries. So these are things that we need to do. These are 4 things I'm outlining as the reasons why we need to have this emergency debate and what we need to do to move forward, to immediately solve this crisis that we're in, to provide a clear plan to get out of it, and to respond to some of the real worries that people have that they had before the pandemic, and it only got worse during it. Donc, aujourd'hui, on va demander un débat d'urgence et la raison pour laquelle je veux avoir ce débat, c'est clairement, on est dans une crise Ce qui se passe à Ottawa, c'est clairement, c'est pas une manifestation, c'est vraiment des actes violents, des actes haineux. Ils ont profané des monuments, mais aussi ils continuent de harceler les citoyens, les gens. Les familles sont maintenant dans un état de peur. Ils ne peuvent pas sortir de la maison. Et ils sont harcelés aussi, on a vu, quelqu'un a essayé de placer un feu dans un meuble. C'est complètement des actes haineux et violents et sont inacceptables aussi. Donc, on propose d'avoir un débat d'urgence. Et il y a 4 éléments que je veux souligner, importants pourquoi on veut avoir ce débat et qu'est-ce qu'on veut présenter comme des solutions pour cette crise. Premièrement, pour les municipalités impactées par cette crise, le gouvernement fédéral et M. Trudeau doit faire preuve de leadership et rencontrer les maires de ces municipalités pour offrir de l'aide du niveau fédéral. Donc, à Ottawa, mais aussi dans les autres villes comme Toronto et à Québec. Aussi, où on traverse la frontière à Coutts, il y a toujours une blocade qui prévenir les camionneurs de traverser la frontière et ça cause énormément de problèmes. Donc, on doit avoir cette rencontre. Deuxièmement, c'est clair qu'il y a de l'interférence étrangère, particulièrement des États-Unis, et on doit arrêter ça tout de suite. C'est clair que les organisateurs de ce convoi, ce n'est pas une manifestation, ils veulent vraiment remplacer le gouvernement qui était élu dans une manière démocratique. Ils veulent remplacer ça avec un comité des gens pas élus. Donc, c'est clairement d'interférence étrangère. C'est clairement une interférence dans notre démocratie avec d'interférences étrangères, les gens des États-Unis qui envoient de l'argent. Donc, on doit arrêter ça. Troisièmement, on doit avoir un plan pour comment on va sortir de la pandémie. C'est clair qu'avant de ça, on a dit aux gens que vous devez être vaccinés, vous devez se faire vacciner et puis ça va nous aider pour sortir de la pandémie. Maintenant, une grande majorité des Canadiens, Canadiennes, une grande majorité des Québécois, Québécoises sont vaccinés, mais il n'y a pas toujours un plan pour comment on va sortir vraiment de la pandémie. Donc, on doit avoir ce plan. Ce plan va inclure des mesures pour vaccination, des tests rapides et aussi de l'aide urgente pour régler la crise dans nos soins de santé. Mais on doit avoir un plan. Comment on va sortir? C'est quoi les prochaines étapes? Et finalement, quatrième, on doit travailler ensemble au Parlement pour régler les problèmes qui s'empiraient depuis le début de cette pandémie. Donc, ça veut dire le coût de la vie, la crise du logement. On doit proposer des solutions, on travaille ensemble pour régler ces problèmes parce que les gens font face des grands problèmes qui sont de plus en plus difficiles pendant cette pandémie. Donc, ce sont les 4 éléments de notre plan et ce qu'on va voir dans les débats. C'est clair qu'on a besoin d'un débat. Si on regarde ce qui se passe, c'est clair, c'est une crise et ça mérite un débat d'urgence. Donc, merci beaucoup. Thanks so much. Je suis prêt pour vos questions. I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Thank you, merci. A reminder that if you have a question, please use the raise your hand function. Un petit rappel, si vous avez une question, d'utiliser la fonction lever la main. We will do one question, one follow-up. On fera une question et un suivi. First question, we'll go to Alex Ballingall from the Toronto Star.
Hey, good morning. Thanks very much. Just wanted to ask you about Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson's talking about the prospect of having the federal government appoint a mediator to talk with the Freedom Convoy protesters and somehow find common ground. What do you think of that?
Well, we've taken the position that this is not a group of people. The organizers have made it clear their intention is to overthrow the government. And these are people that are not. The organizers are certainly not people that we can have that type of discourse with. But we certainly have to do something. This is an untenable situation. It's clear that things cannot continue as they are, and so the federal government needs to sit down with the municipalities, in this case with Mayor Watson, and say, hey, what can we do to help to solve this problem? We need to be open to whatever possible. We want to obviously look for a peaceful way to resolve this, but we need to resolve this because it is untenable. And there's a number of elements that I've outlined that we can do. We need to stop the foreign interference and the money that's flowing into Canada. That's a big problem. And then we also need to provide a plan. I think a lot of people, not this convoy, not the people there, but Canadians in general, there are people that are saying, hey, like, we've done our part, we're vaccinated, we agree with getting vaccinated, our families are vaccinated. Now what? What's it going to take for us to get through this? I think we need to provide that plan. And then, and finally, there's lots of things that people are really frustrated with, not the convoy, but people in general, that are real fears and worries. Like, there's people that are obviously vaccinated and are working hard, but they can't afford a home, they can't afford their groceries, and so we've got to provide solutions to them. So those are some of the things that I think we need to do.
Just on the foreign interference and on the money, how exactly do you think the government, I don't know if there's instruments or mechanisms they can use to actually block that or do something or raise it with the Biden administration? I have no idea, but what do you think they should actually do to stop that, what you're calling interference from the US?
Well, some of it is reaching out to American counterparts. Absolutely. Our foreign affairs minister can reach out to the right channels in the American government. Mr. Trudeau can reach out to Mr. Biden, President Biden, and have conversations there. But it's clear that, it's not really hidden. There's tweeting out. There's attorney generals from different states tweeting out. They're angry at GoFundMe for returning the funds. Well, it's clear that the funds were being used inappropriately. GoFundMe made the right decision there. But it's clear that there's lots of foreign money flowing into Canada, and it's not flowing in to support a charity or to support an initiative that is a positive thing. It's flowing in to support folks that clearly have expressed their intent is to overthrow a democratically elected government. Like, that's not a surprise. It's in their memorandum of understanding on their website. The organizers have made it clear. So this cannot continue. And so there's lots of tools that we have at the federal level that we need to use to prevent foreign money being used to interfere with our democracy.
Prochaine question, Juliane Lapointe de Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour, M. Singh.
Bonjour.
Pendant que le centre-ville d'Ottawa est assiégé, Justin Trudeau, lui, n'a pas d'événement public à son horaire encore aujourd'hui. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez de ça? Est-ce que vous êtes surpris par le silence du premier ministre?
Oui, je suis surpris. Une raison pour laquelle j'ai présenté ma demande pour un débat d'urgence, c'était à cause d'un manque de leadership fédéral dans toute cette crise. Je respecte et je reconnais le fait que il a tombé malade avec le COVID-19 et un de ses enfants aussi. Donc, je comprends que ça, c'est difficile et tous mes condoléances, mais je souhaite qu'il a une bonne récupération. Mais c'est clair qu'on a besoin de leadership fédéral à ce moment. Et c'est pourquoi je demande ce débat d'urgence. Je veux qu'on fasse le travail nécessaire pour régler cette crise et présenter des solutions et avoir un débat pour cette raison. Oui, je suis surpris parce que la situation s'empire et maintenant la situation est arrivée à un niveau vraiment sérieuse.
Sauf que là, ça fait 10 jours que les manifestants sont là. Est-ce qu'il n'est pas un peu tard pour débattre du sujet? Comment on explique finalement aux résidents d'Ottawa qui n'ont pas dormi depuis 10 jours que les politiciens parlent encore d'un plan, d'un débat, mais qu'il ne semble pas encore y avoir de solutions concrètes là, pour les sortir de là?
Si j'étais Premier ministre, j'aurais dû répondre tout de suite. Rencontre le maire, faire tout ce que je peux pour offrir de l'aide au niveau municipal pour régler ce problème. Donc, j'utilise les outils que j'ai. Et comme une chef de parti opposition, je peux présenter des débats. C'est clair qu'on doit agir. C'est clair que la situation est vraiment difficile. Et c'est pourquoi on demande un débat d'urgence à ce moment, parce que c'est vraiment une situation d'urgence. C'est une crise et on doit présenter des solutions pour qu'on peut pousser le gouvernement d'agir.
Prochaine question, Hélène Bizetti de l'Écoop de l'information.
Oui, bonjour, M. Singh.
Bonjour.
Je voulais juste revenir à cette idée de l'argent étranger. Vous semblez dire que, bon, c'est inacceptable, cette interférence, mais à une autre époque, quand, par exemple, les gouvernements conservateurs se battaient contre l'argent étranger pour soutenir les causes environnementales, là, vous étiez contre cette espèce de chasse à l'argent étranger. Pouvez-vous nous expliquer le double critère que vous avez en cette matière?
Pas du tout, double critère. C'est clair. Dans ce cas, avec le convoi, leur but, c'est de remplacer un gouvernement qui a été élu dans une manière démocratique. C'est clairement présenté sur leur site web. Ils veulent remplacer un gouvernement élu par les gens. Et dans ce cas, donner l'argent à ce mouvement, c'est vraiment donner l'argent à de interférences dans notre démocratie. Ce n'est pas la même chose que aider des mouvements pour l'environnement ou pour aider les gens dans les hôpitaux ou des organismes qui font d'autres sortes de travail. Les organisateurs ont dit clairement, ils veulent vraiment remplacer le gouvernement qui était élu dans une manière démocratique. Dans ce cas, c'est clair que c'était des interférences inappropriées.
Mais est-ce vraiment le cas? Vous dites, c'est clair qu'ils veulent renverser le gouvernement, mais en même temps, ils n'ont même pas essayé de rentrer dans les édifices du Parlement. Il y a peut-être certaines personnes qui présentent des pétitions, mais en grosse majorité, ils veulent surtout faire lever les mesures sanitaires. Sur quoi vous vous basez pour affirmer, hors de tout doute, que tous ces gens encore à Ottawa tentent de renverser le gouvernement?
C'est sur le site web. Les organisateurs ne cachent pas ça. C'est ouvert pour tout le monde de regarder. C'est sur le site web, c'est clair que ce qu'ils veulent faire. Et aussi, ce n'est pas une manifestation. Leurs actes, ce n'est pas des actes des gens qui font une manifestation. C'est des gens qui harcèlent les gens, qui harcèlent les citoyens, qui menacent les gens. Il y a plusieurs exemples que les policiers ont dit des crimes que ces gens ont fait. Et tous leurs efforts ce n'est pas de cibler le gouvernement. La grande majorité de leurs activités sont dans le soir, quand il n'y a aucune personne dans les édifices du Parlement. Et c'est vraiment pour menacer les citoyens. Donc, le but d'une manifestation, c'est de présenter vos problèmes au gouvernement. Mais ce qu'ils font, c'est vraiment de menacer les citoyens, la population. Et leur but, ils ne le cachent pas. C'est bien clair sur le site web. Un memorandum of understanding qui dit clairement ce qu'ils veulent faire. Donc, tout ça présente clairement que ce n'est pas un organisme ou un mouvement qui doit être appuyé. Particulièrement, ils ne doivent pas avoir l'argent étranger, particulièrement des États-Unis, pour continuer d'aider leurs efforts, parce que leurs efforts, ce n'est pas positif, pas du tout.
Prochaine question, nous avons Émilie Bergeron de la presse canadienne.
Oui, bonjour, M. Singh. Vous m'entendez bien?
Oui.
Je voudrais vous entendre sur l'idée évoquée par M. Watson ce matin, qui disait que possiblement on pourrait nommer un médiateur pour mettre fin à cette crise-là. Vous pensez quoi de cette idée-là?
Je pense que, comme j'ai dit ailleurs, qu'on doit offrir de l'aide au niveau municipal de notre gouvernement fédéral. Donc, c'est important d'offrir l'aide pour régler cette crise. Et je dis que le Premier ministre, M. Trudeau, doit avoir une rencontre avec Maire Watson, mais aussi avec les autres municipalités frappées par ce convoi. Donc, ça, c'est important. L'idée spécifique ou la suggestion spécifique, ce n'est pas exactement ce que je pense qu'on doit faire parce que c'est clair que les organisateurs qui menacent la population, qui font des actes horribles, les actes haineux, qui harcèlent les gens. Ce n'est pas une groupe avec laquelle on doit parler. Et j'ai présenté des autres choses qu'on doit faire, comme avoir un plan, comme arrêter l'argent étranger, comme offrir l'aide au niveau municipal et puis régler les problèmes dans la vie des gens, ou faire le travailler ensemble pour régler ces problèmes, comme des actes qu'on peut faire pour réduire les tensions. Mais cette situation spécifique, je pense que ce n'est pas exactement ce qu'on doit faire.
Et vous attendez quoi de M. Trudeau concernant un signal là, qu'il veut travailler avec vous, avec les autres partis pour trouver une impasse, comme vous dites, pour trouver une solution à l'impasse, comme vous dites. Est-ce que ce serait quoi un premier pas? Est-ce que ce serait qu'il se présente à la période de questions, par exemple? Ça commence par quoi, selon vous?
Si vous pouvez répéter votre question spécifiquement, parce que je pense que j'ai manqué le détail spécifique dans cette crise, qu'est-ce qu'elle peut faire spécifiquement pour la crise comme ce qui se passe à Ottawa, ou est-ce que vous parlez de l'impasse dans le Parlement?
Non, je parle de la crise à Ottawa dont vous parlez avec les camionneurs et les manifestants. Par quoi devrait commencer M. Trudeau selon vous? Est-ce que ce serait, par exemple, de participer à la période de questions cet après-midi? C'est quoi le premier pas qu'il doit faire selon vous?
Premier pas, c'est rencontrer les maires frappés par les convois. Donc, rencontrer Mayor Watson, rencontrer les maires à Toronto et à Québec, et aussi la municipalité près de Coutts, en Alberta, où les camionneurs sont impactés ou sont frappés maintenant par un convoi qui bloque le passage des camions qui essaient de traverser la frontière pour faire le travail. Donc, premièrement, c'est une rencontre avec ces municipalités. Deuxièmement, c'est d'arrêter l'argent étranger. Et troisièmement, c'est d'offrir un plan pour comment on va sortir de la pandémie, un plan clair pour la population en général. Donc, ce sont les trois éléments immédiats. Et puis, on doit aussi travailler ensemble pour régler les problèmes dans la vie des gens, offrir des solutions pour les problèmes comme la crise du logement, comme la coût de la vie qui augmente. On doit travailler sur les solutions pour aider les gens.
Next question, we have David Thurton from CBC News.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Good morning. Thank you so much for taking my questions. It's good to see you. I'm interested in some of the comments you said off the top that the other parties have showed a lack of leadership, or maybe you said specifically the Liberals. I'm wondering if you can expand on that a little bit more and what impact that lack of leadership has had on this protest.
Certainly. Well, first and foremost, the Conservatives are emboldening the protesters. They're going out and meeting with them, saying there's good people on both sides, clearly evoking that Trump language. There have been no protests in Ottawa that look like this. When there's been far more people, there's not been this rampant examples of harassing of citizens, of verbal assaults, of physical assaults, of charges being laid by the police, even though they're not actually that present. So many charges were missed. But the sheer number of examples of hate, of just desecrating memorials, like all the acts in total do not represent a normal peaceful protest that's raising concerns. And the fact that all their efforts are clearly directed at the citizens, they're not directed at Parliament. The most noise they make is when no one is in Parliament. So clearly they're harassing and terrorizing the citizens of Ottawa instead of focusing their concern with government and government decisions. And given that the Conservatives are emboldening them by meeting them and using Trumpian language like there's good people on both sides, clearly inappropriate. And Mr. Trudeau has been absent. And I acknowledge that, of course, he's sick and he's got a young one at home, one of his children that's sick. But this is a crisis, and he hasn't been there to provide leadership. And when he has, it's been also to kind of pile on in inflaming the tensions as opposed to providing leadership to solve the problems. And that has all allowed for this thing to get worse and worse. And so that's my concern. Why I'm calling this emergency debate is to say, listen, we need to provide some solutions. We need to immediately work with the municipalities impacted, offer federal help. We need to stop that flow of foreign money. We need to start figuring out how we can lay out a plan for Canadians that we're going to get through this pandemic. And there's a lot of things that people are angry about before the pandemic, things that have only gotten worse, like the cost of housing and the cost of living. We need to work together to solve those problems as well. So those are things that I think need to happen, and my concern about the lack of leadership in responding to what's going on right now.
Thank you for that. I do have to ask about what you think, or what the NDP thinks about what would be some of the immediate solutions to end the situation that we're seeing right now. And I also have to ask, what role does the military play in an immediate end to this situation?
Well, I think the first thing is having that formal meeting with the mayor to say, listen, what do we need to do? The mayor and the mayor's team have kind of more on the ground, direct understanding of the extent of what's going on. And so that's the first step. Meet with the mayor, offer federal help, and talk about what we need to do to get through this. And then we also need to stop the flow of funds that are coming in. I think those are kind of tied together. We meet with the mayors and municipalities impacted, but also stop the foreign money and the foreign influence. Then in terms of the military, I don't want to see a violent conclusion to this. I want to see a peaceful resolution. And so that's not the first step that I think of. I think of other tools that the federal government could come up with in working with the mayor. But there needs to be some leadership here. And I think outside of the immediate steps of meeting with the mayor, looking to see how we can help federally and looking at what tools we can use and stopping the foreign aid, I really believe the other steps are very vital. Canadians in general need a plan. We need to provide that plan to Canadians of what we're going to do to get out of this pandemic. I think that's vital. I think that's crucial. I think that would take down some of the temperature across the country, broadly speaking. Not speaking about the convoy, but just broadly speaking, that would be really helpful. And providing real solutions to give people some hope. People are angry about a number of things. Again, I'm not speaking of the convoy, but just regular Canadians that have been vaccinated, have done their part, are still pretty frustrated with a lot of things. Those frustrations need to be solved as well. And we need to be working together to solve them. I think those are really vital steps.
Next question, we have Natasha Bolowski from the National Observer.
Hi, thank you so much for taking our questions.
Of course.
I wanted to, sort of clarify your stance on the language surrounding this protest. Some have referred to it as an occupation, insurrection. There's a lot of different terminology flying around. How do you characterize it?
It's wrong. What's clear, what they're doing, this is not a normal protest. There have been many protests that have happened at Ottawa. I've been a part of protests in the past. You raise a grievance with a decision the government's made. If they're cutting housing or if they're making a bad decision that hurts people come together and say, hey, stop making this bad decision. That's very important, very legitimate, and a vibrant part of our democracy. In those cases, people direct their concern towards the people who've made a decision, and you're concerned about a specific decision. You focus on that decision, or you focus on a policy, and you raise concerns with the government. What's happening in these convoys is they're actually hurting people. They're targeting people. In Coutts, truckers who are vaccinated, who are bringing supplies into Canada, have been stuck at the border. And initially were stuck for days, where they were running out of food, running out of water, had no access to the washroom. These are working class people that are directly being hurt by these convoy people. I mean, that's wrong. In Ottawa, it's the Ottawa citizens that are being terrorized. They're being harassed. They're being verbally assaulted. They're being told they can't go out of their homes and they got to stay at home because of risk of violence. And we've got healthcare workers that are being told that these are the type of folks that are going to harass you and threaten you. Don't wear identifiable clothing. Don't wear your scrubs. What has happened to get to the point that the people that care for us, that keep us healthy and safe, have to be worried and afraid of their safety, wearing clothing that should identify them as heroes? It's now identifying them as people that are a target for these folks. So all these indicia to me, with including the desecration of the memorials, including all the examples of hate crimes, including the hate symbols being waved around. These are not indicia of just a protest. These are people that are engaging in violence, intimidation, and directing that towards citizens. That is all wrong. And then the example that I pointed to, the organizers of this convoy are not hiding the fact. They've got a memorandum of understanding on their website that clearly states their goal in a bunch of legal gibberish, but it's still their goal that they want to overthrow the government, the democratically elected government. They want to overthrow it and supplant it with a committee of people, unelected, who knows how they're going to be determined. And that is another example of their goal, which is to overthrow the government. All of this points to a very problematic and in total a wrong series of actions that they're taking. And so I would call what they're doing wrong and hurtful, and they're terrorizing and intimidating citizens and people instead of what a regular protest does, focus on the government and government decisions. And for all these reasons, I think this is why we really need to take it seriously and work towards a resolution.
Thank you. And like you said, this protest, for lack of a better word, has displayed some absolutely abhorrent things that you just mentioned. And there's no denying that other protests, particularly those by Indigenous land defenders, have been met, with incredible force from our police forces across Canada, with many recent examples, in BC, but of course also in the city of Ottawa over the years. What needs to change on a federal level to ensure that that treatment is not applied to land defenders when hateful protests like this are allowed to flourish, some might say, in the city?
I think that term, they're allowed to flourish, has been accurate. And I think people are really angry by that and really frustrated by that this flagrant ignoring of the laws, breaking of the laws, flagrantly breaking laws has been allowed to happen for these folks. And whereas land defenders, I asked this question in Parliament, I think it's really pertinent. Land defenders and racialized people, Black community members, when they're raising concerns around police brutality in the Black Lives Matter movement, or Indigenous communities that are just trying to save and protect their sacred lands, they are met with completely different force. And those are legitimate questions. And so what we've been calling for a number of years now, we've been working on, at the federal level, we can provide leadership with an overhaul of the laws around the RCMP, how they engage, when use of force is appropriate, if appropriate, the criteria and the protocol in terms of how to work with people and how to interact with people, particularly Indigenous, racialized, and Black community members. And so these are things that we want to see changed. We've been calling for these changes for a while now. Frankly, Mr. Trudeau has not responded to our push to get these changes to happen. But we've been doing work in the committee level, and we've been raising changes that need to happen, and we're going to continue to fight for that. I think there needs to be a systemic overhaul of the interactions of police with marginalized people, and it's clear in this example that the convoy folks are being treated completely differently than land defenders and Indigenous communities, racialized and Black community members have been treated in the past, when they've raised real grievances and real problems and tried to voice those.
Prochaine question, Mylène Crête de la Presse.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
J'aimerais savoir, vous caractérisez la manifestation comme étant des gens là, qui veulent renverser le gouvernement, des gens qui ont commis des crimes haineux, qui harcèlent les citoyens. Il y a beaucoup de gens qui ont participé à la manifestation au cours des 2 derniers week-ends qui ne se reconnaîtraient pas dans les descriptions que vous en faites. Quand on marchait au centre-ville, c'est plutôt une ambiance un peu de fête, là. Est-ce que vous ne pensez pas que ces gestes-là que vous décrivez sont peut-être l'œuvre de voyous qui se sont greffés à la manifestation tellement il y avait de gens qui étaient présents?
Si on regarde une manifestation, on regarde leur comportement, ce qu'ils font, et fait une comparaison avec les manifestations dans le passé. Jamais dans le passé, on a vu des mêmes exemples, des actes haineux, de menacer la population, de cibler les citoyens au lieu de gouvernement. C'est complètement différent. Et le fait que on avait dans le passé des manifestations qui n'empêchent pas les mouvements des personnels de santé, les personnels qui font le travail pour l'aide médicale pour les gens. Donc, on n'a pas vu ces mêmes sortes des actes. Et tous ces actes en total représentent quelque chose qui n'est pas une manifestation. Et c'est important qu'on n'oublie pas les comparaisons avec les autres manifestations, avec beaucoup plus grand nombre de gens. Et on n'avait pas eu cette même sorte des situations, des exemples. Donc, c'est clair dans ce cas, ce n'est pas une manifestation, c'est vraiment des actes de violence, des actes de terroriser, de menacer la population. Et leur cible, ce n'est pas le gouvernement à ce moment, parce que la grande majorité de leurs activités, c'est dans le soir. Et le seul groupe qui est frappé par ces activités sont les citoyens, les familles, les enfants, les gens qui dorment. Donc, c'est clair qu'ils ciblent la population au lieu du gouvernement. Et les organisateurs de ce convoi ont présenté leur demande dans un memorandum of understanding. Et ils ne cachent pas leur but de renverser le gouvernement. Donc, tout ça présente comment c'est vraiment un problème. Ce n'est pas quelque chose pas du tout positif et légitime. On avait des manifestations, on va avoir les manifestations dans le futur et leur comportement, leur manière de manifester, c'est complètement différent.
Vous parlez du rôle que le gouvernement fédéral doit jouer. Est-ce que ce n'est pas le rôle des provinces d'apporter de l'aide justement aux municipalités qui sont aux prises avec ce type de manifestation-là, présentement, de convoi?
Je ne dis pas que ma suggestion arrête les provinces de aussi offrir de l'aide, mais pour moi, un leader, c'est quelqu'un qui cherche des solutions, pas quelqu'un qui cherche des excuses. Et dans une crise, le Premier ministre a une responsabilité d'offrir d'aide. Et c'est pourquoi, particulièrement dans la capitale du pays, le gouvernement fédéral et le Premier ministre a un rôle à jouer, a une responsabilité d'aider à régler la tension, la crise. Et c'est pourquoi je demande un débat d'urgence parce que je veux montrer de leadership, comment on peut aider et les étapes qu'on peut prendre pour faire quelque chose qui va aider les Canadiens, Canadiennes, les Québécois, Québécoises.
Next question, Marie Wolf with the Canadian Press.
Yeah, thank you. You're talking about earlier about land defenders, and I just wondered if, since we're on the subject of protests, whether you'd like to comment on what's happening or has happened in Wet'suwet'en. And I know that there's a large petition calling on you to have a more vociferous response to it, particularly calling on the BC Premier to stop sending in the RCMP armed police. And I just wondered, since we're on the subject of protests, whether you thought this was the time to say something about that possibly more ardently.
Thank you very much for the question. I've been really clear that seeing the use of force of police against Indigenous women and land defenders is not reconciliation. And I've long had a problem with the protocols used by the use of force, the policies of the RCMP, and that we need to change that. That is completely within the federal government's jurisdiction. We have long called for those changes. We've been calling for changes for the RCMP since before the Black Lives Matter protests, when people were raising concerns about police violence against racialized and Indigenous people. We share that concern. We are frustrated with that. And we have been calling for systemic changes to the RCMP to show leadership that hopefully will influence other levels of policing, because we need to make sure that there's a different approach. It is hurtful to see the violence that we've seen. We've seen other examples. I shared examples of an Inuk man that was doored by an RCMP vehicle, of a chief of an Indigenous community that was violently arrested by RCMP. there are numerous examples of violence against Indigenous people and racialized people. And we can do something about the RCMP because it's federal. It is within our federal jurisdiction to change the approach, to change the use of force, to change the policies. And we are pushing for that. We're currently doing work on it in committee, and we're going to continue to push for changes. We want to see a change to policing, and we want to see a policing that does not target Indigenous people, racialized people, Black community members with violence. And that has happened too often.
Yeah, on that subject, I mean, you said you wanted to see a peaceful solution to this current protest, but we've seen, snipers and armed police. Does it concern you that, this is a tinderbox and that it could actually flare up? What is your ideal resolution to this?
Ideal resolution, one of the things that could be very helpful is if all politicians in Ottawa state clearly, you've sent a message, time for you to go home now. And if we all say that in a united voice, that would be very helpful. Right now, the Conservatives are emboldening them. The Liberals are using this as well as a wedge issue. I think what we need to do is these folks need to go home, and we need to work with the municipalities to provide help to achieve that. We need to also lay out we need to stop the foreign money coming in. We need to lay out a clear plan for how we're going to get through this pandemic. That would really help countrywide to address some of the frustration that people have. These are the vaccinated people, the over 90% of Canadians that are getting vaccinated. We need to make sure that they know what the next steps are and the plan is. And then we need to make sure that we're dealing with the problems that people are living with that have gotten worse in the pandemic. We need to also do that. That's also very, very important. The housing crisis and cost of living, healthcare that keeps on getting to a point of crumbling. People have had their surgeries pushed back and delayed. People have gotten sick that haven't been able to get help because of the cuts in our healthcare system, because of the underfunding, which has been decades and decades of underfunding. So we need to see some real serious steps taken. And I've laid out some of the steps that I think would really help to solve this crisis and help us move forward. I'm going to pass it back to Melanie Richer and see if there's additional questions.
Sorry, Jagmeet. I was talking and I was still on mute. Next question, we will go to Cormac McSweeney for City News.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. So you say you want the feds to reach out to municipalities to find solutions to this, but the city of Ottawa has been in contact with federal ministers throughout the protest, and so far no formal requests for additional resources have been put to the feds aside from the Ottawa Police asking the RCMP for more officers. And on foreign interference, the Ottawa Police have already said they're working with national and international agencies to investigate the funding of this protest. So, I mean, these things are already being done. So I'm just wondering, what exactly are you calling for that isn't already being done that could potentially be done by the federal government to find some sort of resolution to all of this?
I think there's something really powerful in the Prime Minister meeting with the municipalities. The Prime Minister stating that this is something that's a priority. People have felt like there's been a lack of leadership. People have felt like there has been the federal government's been missing. And so to have that openly happen, I think would send a clear message. This is being taken seriously. And then the foreign interference is something that's ongoing. So we need to see that escalated. So I want to see that taken really seriously and be understood as foreign interference. And then the two other steps are things that we have not seen yet. We have not seen the federal government come out with a clear plan. What is the plan for us to get through this pandemic? We have done so much. Canadians that have been vaccinated, triple vaccinated, are saying, well, we're doing our part. When are we going to get out of this? What does it look like? What does the end game look like? And I think that's something that's been missing. Canadians don't know what the next steps are going to be. And so I think the federal government has a responsibility to provide that. And that's going to certainly help in alleviating the tensions across the country. And then and that plan is going to involve vaccination, it's going to involve testing, and it's going to involve immediate help to our healthcare system, which has been at the brink of collapse. And a part of the frustration that Canadians feel that they can't get the care they need. Their loved ones are being delayed when it comes to the procedures. That's something that we need to see. And then the final piece is there are a lot of problems that people have lived with before the pandemic that only got worse in the pandemic. And I'm talking about the housing crisis and the cost of living and the fact that people are really worried about what that's going to mean for them and their families. And I think that's something that we need to see parliamentarians come together and work on. But this is a crisis where the federal government and particularly the Prime Minister have not really felt present, and people have felt like that there's been a missing leadership, and I want to provide that. I also believe strongly that there has been a clear attempt to use this convoy by the Conservatives to make it an opportunity to hurt the Liberals, to make it an opportunity to gain points politically. That is wrong. It should not be used that way. And I've seen the Liberals also use this as a wedge issue. What we need to do is provide solutions. We need to bring people together. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the emergency debate.
Now, on what the city of Ottawa is asking for, this is a bit of a two-parter. So on the negotiations aspect, I know you've already addressed this, that you don't agree with Mayor Watson's call for negotiating or assigning a mediator to negotiate with the group that's behind this protest. But if the federal government decided to accept that request from the mayor, do you have fears that it could embolden future demonstrations if they think that illegal acts and occupying a city is the way to get their voices heard with the federal government? And then slightly different on the second part, some city councillors are suggesting that the federal government take operational control of dealing with the protest itself, despite the fact that this is on municipal land. Most of this is happening off federal jurisdiction. So is that something that you would like to see, as opposed to negotiations, the feds taking operational control of handling the protest itself?
I'll start with the second question first. If the municipalities, and in this case, if Ottawa feels like the federal level has more resources and can do the work necessary of the operational control, if that would help, then I think that offer should be on the table. And if that's something that will actually assist and will make things better, then yeah, of course we should look at that. And that again would be something in working with the municipality, not kind of usurping control, but asking if that would be helpful. And if there's more resources and more know-how, and if there's a way for the federal government to be helpful in that way, then that's something that should be explored. On the first point, you've outlined some of the reasons why I'm concerned. This isn't a group that's saying, we have concern with a particular legislation that's passed. We are protesting against this legislation that has been put forward, and we need to discuss how we can improve things or rescinding certain legislation. This is a group, the organizers particularly, have made it clear. I mean, these are people that are a part of Wexit. They want to divide the country. These are people that have put out a memorandum of understanding that states clearly their goal of replacing the elected officials. They've gone as far as to say they would meet with the Governor General and the Senate to set up a committee. I mean, they're pretty clear in what they want to do. So meeting with folks that want to overthrow a democratically elected government, I don't think is the right thing to do. In addition, I agree that because of their behavior, the steps taken, the sheer number of harassment, violence, desecration, hate symbols, hate flags, like this is not normal. Like when people say, "Oh, you're drawing attention to some examples," those are not examples that you can point to in other demonstrations where they desecrate a memorial, where they harass citizens, where they're terrorizing the people. Like that's not something that happens. Any small minority of people doing that just does not happen. That's not what normal protesters do. They target the government. They don't target the people, and they don't flagrantly, continually break laws all over the place in their goal of terrorizing the people. And so this is clearly problematic. Civil disobedience is one thing when directed towards the government to raise concerns about a specific government policy or legislation, but to just terrorize people and break laws to terrorize the community and the citizens and threaten people and have acts of violence and try to burn down a building. These aren't just one-offs. There's so many examples of this that it's clearly depicting a group of people and a culture that's allowing and emboldening this type of behavior. And that's my problem with trying to mediate with folks like that's emboldening the wrong sort of behavior. And that's why I have concerns about it.
Next question, we have Kevin Gallagher from CTV News.
They should be unmuted. Mr. Singh, Where does the accountability lie here? You've talked about a lot of people you say aren't acting or aren't showing leadership. Is this something that the Ottawa Police should have dealt with? Did they have the capacity to deal with it? Should the city have asked for federal help sooner? Who is accountable here after what we've seen over the past nearly 11 days?
I think in retrospect, some of the thinking that's coming out is that allowing this convoy to dig in so quickly, so early was problematic, and I think that could have been prevented early on. But really, I think this is the nation's capital. This is a serious crisis, and the Prime Minister has not been really visible on this. And again, I understand that there was a COVID-19 a test or a positive test, and that one of his children as well. And I understand that. I think that's it's obviously a scary and a difficult thing. But this is a crisis that demands leadership, and I think really fundamentally, that's been where we've seen the biggest lack of leadership. That early on when this happened, there should have been an immediate offer to work with the municipality to deal with it. Early on, there should have been a clear attempt not to politicize or to kind of inflame this or to find ways to gain points on this or create wedges. That this should have been, there's a problem, it's impacting people, and we need to solve it. And there should have been from the beginning an offer to provide that assistance federally to the municipality. And in addition to the other points that I brought up, people are wondering what the plan is, and they need to know what's the plan to get out of this thing. Like, how do we get out of this pandemic? That's a real question. And we also need to know that people are working together. People want to know that parliamentarians are working together to deal with finding some of the solutions to the things that people are really worried about. Like I mentioned, the housing costs and trying to find a roof over your head and cost of living. Like, these are real things that add to the tension in the country. And so these are the things that I've been calling for. And I think it comes down to it. It's the Prime Minister in the capital of our country that hasn't been as present in this crisis as he should have been.
A lot of the protesters obviously are very upset with mandates. And there are some premiers, for example, Premier Jason Kenney, who's considering ending the vaccination passport to go to different businesses. But there are public health officials saying, before measures like that are taken away, maybe hospitalization rates should fall by, say, 70%. You're saying that you want this debate to talk about some of the solutions on the way out. I think that there are other Canadians outside of the Canadians who have been protesting Parliament Hill who are concerned about government overreach in some way, concerned about maybe having to face new vaccination mandates or always having to show a vaccination passport to take a plane or a train, for example. Should there have always been a discussion as to what the public health emergency or crisis warrants in terms of the future of how these different restrictions are put in place? I guess what I'm saying is, what would you want to see in terms of how these restrictions are eventually loosened? Because I think most Canadians do want a time when things are more back to, quote, normal.
Yeah, I think that was my third point, this idea of a plan. And I think that when Canadians who, like the vast majority, have gotten vaccinated, and I think we're at a high rate of vaccination, and we can be proud of that, but people have gotten double vaccinated, have followed the healthcare mandates and have been following the rules, are saying, well, now what? Like, how do we get through this? And I think what's been missing kind of throughout the pandemic has been a clear path. Like, we need to achieve this level of vaccination because it's going to help reduce the pressures on our healthcare system. And I think some of that education or that awareness or providing information was missing. People didn't know. And I think that really helps if you say, hey, when people are vaccinated, they're less likely to get seriously ill and they don't end up in the hospital. And then we don't get delays so that someone who needs a knee replacement or a hip replacement can still go in and get that procedure. And we know that a lot of those procedures have been pushed off. A lot of treatments, even some cancer treatments, have been pushed off, and some diagnoses that could have happened got pushed off because of a lack of resources. So making it clear that the vaccination was one to keep you individually safe, but also to prevent an overflow of our healthcare system. And that's really vital. But now people are saying, well, what's the next step? We've gotten vaccinated. What's the next step look like? And I think we need to be looking at what those next steps are and what does the future look like, and how are we going to deal with is COVID going to be a part of our normal life? And then how are we going to deal with that on a daily basis? One of the things we know for certain is that our healthcare system should never be pushed to the brink. And that means making sure we've got stable, good funding so our healthcare system can deal with maybe COVID being a part of our life for a long time. And so that we're not worried about having a wave increase and then all of a sudden our healthcare can't deal with it and respond to it. And then we've got to have serious lockdowns. I mean, there is no excuse 2 years into this to not have a clear plan of what a future is going to look like. If it's going to be a future where COVID is more likely to be a fact of life, then how do we deal with that in a way that doesn't disrupt life for Canadians? Those are some legit questions. And I think we need a clear plan to lay out for Canadians, okay, this is what we do, this is how we're going to get out of this pandemic and get back to a place of normal.
Next question, we have Marika Walsh from Globe and Mail.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. I'm wondering if you can explain what you mean when you say that the Prime Minister has options at his hands. You've criticized him for his absence, but I don't actually understand what you think he can do right now. What are the options that you see as legitimate and doable?
Well, first off, we've been in this crisis for 10 days and he's not really been present. I think it just makes sense that if you're the Prime Minister of Canada and the capital is going through this crisis, Prime Minister's got to be present in a crisis like this, provide leadership. And I've said that formal meeting with the municipality to say, hey, I'm here, the leader of this country, I'm here to offer help, has a really powerful symbolic importance. Like, I think that would send a really clear message that we're taking this seriously. And I think that's important. I've laid out some of the steps that I want to see happen in terms of how we can bring down some of the pressure or the tension Canada-wide. And I think those are important things. I think having a plan for how we get out of this pandemic is really important. Can't be underemphasized how important that is. People are genuinely following the rules, are vaccinated, and are saying, now what? And I think that plan needs to be there. And then the problem that people are living with, I think the Prime Minister can deal with some of this or help us work together for solutions on some of the problems that we're dealing with. But an increased role in dealing with this crisis, offering all help possible. And there's lots of tools the federal government has. What those resources look like and what those tools are, you can work with the municipalities to provide that. And then secondly, that the foreign interference is a really serious concern. And I don't think that it's being taken at the serious level that it should be. This is a group of people that are trying to overthrow the government. They've made that really clear. And they're being funded by many people from the States. What is the response to that? What's the Prime Minister going to say about that? I think that would send a powerful message if the Prime Minister comes out and says, hey, this is foreign interference and it should not continue. And foreign money should not be going towards supporting a group that's trying to replace elected officials by meeting with the Senate and the Governor General to try to put in place a committee, which is stated on their website, on their memorandum of understanding. So, I mean, these are some serious things, and Prime Minister hasn't really shown that leadership. And again, I give some grace for the fact that he's tested positive for COVID and one of his children as well. This is verging on 11 days of a serious crisis in the nation's capital, and it's spread to other cities. So there's got to be a response from the federal government as well.
Okay, thank you. And you said earlier that you think that the police could have avoided this if they'd changed their initial approach. Can you specify where you see issues with their initial response to the protest that led us to this impasse?
Well, I think one of the things that's been raised is that when the initial convoy came in and kind of started digging in, that initially some of that could have been stopped and prevented so that they didn't get to dig into the level that they did. Again, that's looking back in retrospect, but I think there's learnings here in the future. If we're going to see a group of people that are not protesting against the government, but are going to try to terrorize the citizens and the community and the people, that can't be allowed to happen ever again. Like, people should protest government decisions whenever they feel like. That's democracy. They're allowed to do that, and they should do that. But it's very different from what we're seeing. This isn't a effort to put pressure on the government as much as it is an effort to terrorize and stress and put pressure on the people and their activities at night, preventing people from sleeping, honking all night long. This isn't directed towards the government. This is directed towards people. And there is a responsibility for police services to protect people from that type of thing from happening. And I think that there were some mistakes made in allowing this to get to this point where people are constantly being harassed and menaced in their own communities. Like should not be happening. Healthcare workers are being stressed and not able to move freely around their communities. I mean, it should never have come to this.
This concludes our press conference. Ceci conclut notre conférence de presse.
Thanks, merci.